They told you death is an ending, a blank space, a curtain call. But what if that's the oldest lie humanity ever believed? Since childhood, when you first asked where we go after we die, the answers given were vague and often laced with fear. Heaven if you're good, hell if you're not, or worse, total nothingness. A permanent switch flipped off. But what if that mystery was never meant to be so impenetrable? What if the truth was hidden, not because it was unknowable, but because it was powerful? Ancient civilizations, particularly the Egyptians, didn't treat death as a riddle. They didn't guess what happened beyond the last breath. They recorded it, mapped it, lived by its laws. Their so-called Book of the Dead isn't some mythological bedtime story. It's not a relic to be admired under glass. It's a guide, an instruction manual for the soul as it steps out of the physical and into the unseen. It wasn't superstition. It was knowledge. A profound science of the spirit. If you've ever felt the quiet suspicion that something important about life and death has been buried, then you're not imagining it. You're remembering. Because the Egyptians weren't obsessed with death like modern scholars suggest. They weren't fixated on tombs and sarcophagi out of fear. They were pursuing truth. Their rituals weren't morbid. Their writings weren't fantasy. They were builders of a spiritual technology so sophisticated, even modern physics is just beginning to catch glimpses of what they knew. What we call the Book of the Dead wasn't a single text. It was a living collection, evolving over generations. A blend of sacred spells, chants, symbolic language, and coded images. Its sole purpose? To help the soul navigate the afterlife. Not metaphorically, not as poetry, literally, step by step. It offered direction for a consciousness stepping outside the physical body into multi-dimensional reality. Tomb art wasn't decorative, it was functional. Those hieroglyphs and images weren't mourning traditions. They were strategic markers, energetic instructions for escaping fear, clearing illusions, and elevating consciousness past the traps of karma and identity. To the Egyptians, dying wasn't a tragedy. It was a journey, a sacred transition from one realm of awareness to another. The way we carry a map to a foreign land, they believed the soul, too, should never travel without orientation. The Book of the Dead was that orientation, a navigational tool not only to survive the death experience, but to awaken through it. It's easy to dismiss this now, surrounded by screens and science, medicated comforts and digital distractions. But if you peel back the religious dogma and academic bias, something astonishing becomes clear. What the Egyptians described, tunnels, gates, light beings, judgment scenes, sounds uncannily similar to what modern near-death experiencers report today. People whose hearts stopped, who were clinically dead, speak of moving through realms of light, meeting guides, confronting their life choices, and feeling boundless love or clarity. Quantum physicists now speak of consciousness that may not reside in the brain, of non-local awareness, of a universe that reacts to observation. They whisper of particles connected across time and space, of reality forming itself around thought and vibration. What was once mysticism is becoming science. But the Egyptians already knew. They weren't inventing these truths. They were preserving them. They encoded what others are only now stumbling upon through labs and medical miracles. And it goes deeper still. The spells in the Book of the Dead weren't primitive sorcery. They were vibrational formulas, specific words and chants designed to harmonize the soul with protective energies and divine intelligence. The gods mentioned in those texts weren't to be worshipped as idols. Each one was a living symbol, representing aspects of your own spiritual anatomy. Every trial the soul faced wasn't some external judgment. It was an internal mirror, a confrontation with fear, guilt, illusion, and ego. This wasn't mythology. It was transformation, initiation. In today's world, death is treated clinically, a flatline, a diagnosis, a certificate, game over. But to the ancient Egyptians, death was when the real journey finally began. They envisioned a series of dimensional gates, each guarded by forces, archetypal, symbolic, or literal, that the soul must recognize and overcome. Tools were not just monuments. They were portals, libraries of instruction carved in stone to assist the departing soul in remembering what it had forgotten. But here's the tragedy. We've lost that map. Or maybe it wasn't lost at all. Maybe it was buried deliberately, hidden, suppressed, reframed as myth to keep us fearful. Because when people fear death, they become easier to control. They obey, they conform, they seek safety, applause, approval. They become forgetful of their divine nature, disconnected from the truth that they were never their bodies to begin with. But something changes the moment you begin to remember. When you feel that stirring in your soul, that the fear of death might be artificial, implanted, it awakens something ancient, the memory that you've been here before, that what lies ahead isn't chaos or nothingness, but a return, a reconnection to your higher self. At the moment of death, something shifts. The breath leaves, the body quiets, and something else, older than time, stirs awake. For most, this is when everything ends. But to the Egyptians, it was the beginning of the soul's ultimate journey. And the first question it faces is not what comes next, but where are you going? The afterlife wasn't a vague dreamscape to them. It was a structured realm, a multidimensional process where awareness unfolds in stages. To move through it successfully meant freedom. To get lost in it meant stagnation or return. The soul, according to their teachings, isn't a singular thing. It's a composite. Multiple parts, each playing a role. There's the Ka, the vital force, the Ba, the personality and emotional presence, and the Akh, the eternal luminous self that only fully awakens through conscious death. The Book of the Dead existed to guide these components, especially the Ba, as it journeyed through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. But the Duat wasn't hell. It wasn't even a place in the traditional sense. It was a metaphysical mirror, a dimension where the soul met its own frequency, its fears, its regrets, its attachments, all magnified and made real. The environment shifted based on the soul's vibration, what you believed, what you feared, what you clung to. These became the terrain. Each gate in the Duat was guarded, not by demons in the Western sense, but by beings of cosmic intelligence. They weren't inherently good or evil. They were initiators. You couldn't pass with weapons or willpower. You passed by remembrance. By resonance, the spells recited at these checkpoints weren't hocus pocus. They were energy codes, spoken frequencies that matched your inner state. If your energy aligned, the gate opened. If not, you remained entangled in illusion, looping through unresolved karma or emotional patterns. One of the most revealing sections of the book is what modern scholars label Spell 125. It's the scene known as the weighing of the heart. The soul stands before scales. On one side, its heart, the repository of all its experiences. On the other, a single feather, representing Ma'at, the principle of truth, balance, and cosmic harmony. If the heart is as light as the feather, the soul passes. If not, it is devoured. Not in eternal damnation, but in dissolution, a reset, a return to unawareness. But here's the key. This isn't punishment, it's physics. The heart, in their philosophy, stores everything we suppress. Every falsehood, betrayal, fear, or shame. The weight isn't symbolic, it's energetic. Heavy hearts sink, aligned hearts rise. The feather isn't judgment, it's your natural state. Truth, balance, presence. The scene, misunderstood for centuries, is not about sin. It's about vibration. And the judgment? It doesn't come from Osiris or any god. It comes from you. The gods in the judgment scene are not there to condemn. They're there to reflect. The entire process is self-assessment. You don't pass or fail based on someone else's decree. You move forward, or you don't, based on your own resonance. This was the sacred knowledge the Egyptians preserved, that the soul's fate is not controlled by any external force. It's governed by frequency. And frequency is shaped by your thoughts, your choices, your courage to live authentically. We live today in a world where people are encouraged to hide from themselves, to numb their emotions, to perform roles for approval. We are taught to lie, first to others, then to ourselves. The heart becomes heavy not because we are wicked, but because we've forgotten how to release. We've forgotten how to live in alignment. But the weighing of the heart happens every day, not just at the end. Every time you silence your truth, you add weight. Every time you choose comfort over honesty, the scales shift. But the good news is, you can lighten it. You can let go. You can begin now. And that's where we'll pause this first step of the journey. We often treat death as something final, a wall we hit with no way to climb over. But what if that's only because we've forgotten what it really is? Across spiritual traditions, from ancient pyramids to Himalayan caves, there's a theme that whispers beneath the surface. Death is not just a physical event. It is a passage, a threshold. But here's the real twist. The journey that death represents doesn't start when your heart stops. It begins the moment you choose to let go of who you're not. The Egyptians knew this. They didn't write their sacred texts only for the dead. They created them for the dying parts of you, the ego, the illusions, the lies you tell yourself just to get through the day. They understood something profound. To truly live as a soul, you have to let the false self dissolve. And that process, as they described it, is neither easy nor comfortable. In modern times, we talk about ego death as if it's an aesthetic or a clever phrase to drop in a conversation. But ego death is ancient. It is the oldest initiation known to humankind. Before anyone could awaken to higher truths, they first had to face the part of themselves that clings to identity, to safety, to performance. You had to lose what you thought was you in order to remember what always was. This was the real meaning of the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. It wasn't a punishment zone. It was a purification chamber, a mirror dimension. Every gate, every creature, every challenge wasn't there to destroy the soul. It was there to strip it clean of illusions, to remove the masks layer by layer until only truth remained. Because the ego cannot survive in realms where light is absolute. Only the soul can walk there. The soul, stripped of pride, of fear, of pretense. And so, the journey through death, as described in the ancient texts, is really the story of every inner transformation. Every time you've had your life fall apart, your identity collapse, your plans unravel, that was the Duat whispering, asking you, are you ready to become more than your roles, your job, your fears? Are you willing to die to what's false? Look closely at the way the Book of the Dead presents the soul's journey. It isn't passive. The soul isn't dragged. It walks, speaks, chooses. It must know what to say, not to charm or deceive, but to resonate. Words weren't words to the Egyptians. They were frequencies, energy codes, and if the soul could speak with alignment, the next gate opened. If not, it remained stuck, looping through patterns of fear or forgetfulness. Each gatekeeper, each figure in the duat, whether lion-headed, serpentine, or luminous, isn't an enemy. It's an aspect of the soul itself, a test of recognition. The soul must face fear without running, face shame without hiding, face its own power without shrinking. That's the real journey. And that journey isn't just post-mortem. It's happening right now, in this moment, in every decision you make. Because here's the secret. We don't wait for death to be judged. We are judged in micro moments every day, not by external gods, but by resonance. When you betray your truth, when you silence your voice, when you act out of fear instead of love, you feel it, a tightness, a weight, a dissonance. That's the feather and the heart, balancing even while you breathe. The scales aren't in some other realm, they are in your chest. The ancient Egyptians were trying to teach this, that every moment is sacred, every word spoken, every thought fed, every emotion indulged or denied. These are the ingredients of your frequency. And that frequency doesn't just shape your afterlife, it shapes your now. Because the realms the Egyptians described, the Duat, the Akhet, the fields of peace, aren't just cosmic destinations, they are states of consciousness. To the untrained eye, ancient Egyptian art looks symbolic, almost cartoonish. Gods with animal heads, bodies in profile, strange postures. But these weren't meaningless images. They were multi-dimensional teachings, languages of light coded into form. They weren't just paintings, they were transmitters, tools to activate the memory buried inside the soul. Take Anubis, for example, the jackal-headed guide who stands at the edge of the death transition. Most think of him as just a death god, but he represents something much deeper. He is the internal compass, the refined instinct, the intuition that rises when logic fails, when everything you know falls away. It is Anubis within you that leads you through darkness. He doesn't walk you to safety, he walks you into transformation. Or look at Osiris, the green-skinned deity who sits on the throne in the judgment scene. He doesn't speak, he doesn't accuse, he listens, he watches. Osiris is not a punisher. He is the keeper of stillness. The divine witness within you that knows the truth even when your ego is spinning stories. When you face your heart, when your life is weighed not in years but in integrity, Osiris is the silent awareness watching it unfold. These gods weren't fictional. They were psychological archetypes, aspects of your inner world given form so that initiates could learn to work with them. Horus was the higher will. Ma'at was alignment. Thoth was divine intelligence. They weren't outside forces. They were inward allies, activated only when the initiate was ready. And the rituals performed in tombs weren't morbid routines. They were metaphysical surgeries. Mummification wasn't just about preserving the body. It was about anchoring the soul's energetic field. The amulets placed over organs, the chants sung by priests, the colors painted onto sarcophagi. They all had purpose, each one designed to prepare the soul for its next phase. Nothing was random. Every symbol, every step, every word was precise. Compare that to how we handle death now. Sterile rooms, machines beeping, silence followed by paperwork. No guidance, no preparation, no understanding. Most people enter death with no map, no training, and no awareness of what's next. They leave this world not in peace but in confusion. Not because death is terrifying, but because we've been taught to forget. But the ancient teachings remain, not in mainstream education, not in your nightly news, but in stone, in scroll, in silence, waiting for the soul that remembers to look again. The Book of the Dead isn't some dusty myth. It is the inheritance of every soul who wants to meet death with eyes open. Because here's the truth. Modern systems don't want you to remember. A soul that knows where it's going cannot be controlled. A soul that understands death doesn't cling to life out of fear. It doesn't sell itself for comfort. It doesn't obey just to stay safe. That soul becomes dangerous. It becomes sovereign. And sovereign souls don't make good consumers. They don't need approval. They don't buy false promises. They awaken, and when enough awaken, the whole system shifts. Maybe that's why this knowledge was buried, not because it was false, but because it was too real. But we're in a time now where remembering is possible. The veil is thin. Death is speaking again, not through priests or pharaohs, but through near-death experiencers, through meditation, through dreams, through the whispers you hear when everything else is quiet. Those who've crossed the threshold and returned don't speak of hellfire or pearly gates. They speak of light, of review, of clarity, of a presence so vast and familiar, it dissolves fear in seconds. And what they describe matches the map, the Egyptian map. A tunnel, a gate, a presence, a review, an understanding that what mattered was never how much money you made or how many people knew your name. It was how aligned you were, how true you stayed, how much you remembered what you are. And in the Egyptian version, that review, the weighing of the heart, doesn't happen once. It happens every time you cross a threshold of awareness, every time you grow, every time you let go of an identity that no longer serves you. The duat isn't just after life, it's during life. Every heartbreak, every betrayal, every moment of silence where you meet your own emptiness. That's the gate. That's the guardian. That's the initiation. So if you've felt lately like something is ending inside you, some part of your life falling apart, some belief collapsing, some layer shedding, that's not failure. That's sacred. That's the death before the death. That's the invitation. Let it fall. Let it burn. Let what you are not be seen, grieved, released. Because the only part of you that can't make the journey is the part that was never real to begin with. When the final breath comes, when the lights dim and the body stills, the question won't be, did you succeed? It'll be, did you remember? Did you live as the soul you are, or just survive as the mask you wore? And your answer won't be given in words, it'll be given in weight. The lightness of your being will speak for itself. That's the deeper meaning behind the Book of the Dead. Not a map to an afterlife paradise, but a call to wake up now, to die consciously, to live with your eyes open, heart light, and spirit sovereign. And that's where we'll pause for now. When you look at the ancient artwork etched into the tombs of Egypt, you might first see myth, animal-headed gods, rigid poses, strange shapes. You might think it's beautiful, but distant, art from a world that no longer exists. But what if that's not what it is? What if what you're seeing isn't decoration or fantasy, but encryption? The Egyptians didn't create symbols just to tell stories. They weren't painting for aesthetics. These glyphs, these postures, these divine figures, each was a code. A message aimed not at the thinking mind, but at the soul itself. They were creating a visual language that bypassed intellect and spoke directly to something deep within, the part of you that remembers. This is the power of the Book of the Dead, not as literature, but as technology. Every symbol, every sequence, every color was calibrated to trigger activation, not imagination. They weren't telling you what to believe. They were helping you remember what you already know, buried under layers of noise and forgetting. Symbols in Egyptian spiritual work always functioned on multiple levels. You could read one as a literal scene, Anubis attending the body, or Thoth recording the judgment. But behind that image was a metaphor, and behind that metaphor was energy. Each scene was a multi-dimensional transmission. These weren't just ideas, they were instructions, and to those initiated, the Book of the Dead wasn't simply read, it was lived. Take the Eye of Horus. Most recognize it as a protective talisman, but look closely and you'll find it encodes the proportions of the human brain, especially the pineal gland, often called the seat of the soul. This wasn't symbolic, it was anatomical, intentional. The Egyptians knew the connection between inner physiology and spiritual vision. They saw the body as a temple and the inner realms as accessible through focused awareness. The Eye of Horus wasn't a charm, it was a doorway. Or the crook and flail crossed over the chest of Osiris. Not props, not royal scepters, but symbols of inner rulership. The crook, gentleness, nurturing guidance. The flail, strength, righteous authority. Together they spoke to balance, of discipline and compassion, held as one. These weren't images to worship. They were aspects of your own power, waiting to be remembered and embodied. And Anubis, the jackal-headed guide, was more than myth. He represented the refined instinct that becomes inner knowing. The guide who walks beside you not only after death, but during every inner death you face in life. He leads not just to tombs, but through transformation. Even the act of mummification was encoded ritual. Every step of the process had a spiritual and energetic function. Removing the organs was not just preservation, it was purification. Placing amulets on specific parts of the body served to harmonize energetic centers, align the soul with protection, and prime consciousness for release. Chants weren't ceremonial, they were frequency tools. Vibration keys spoke in geometry to shape reality. The rituals, the texts, the artwork, all of it formed a technology of remembrance. A map not drawn on paper, but embedded in rhythm, tone, form, and symbol. The Book of the Dead wasn't passive knowledge. It was participatory. It called for engagement, for embodiment. And when performed with intention, it didn't just inform the soul, it activated it. But here's the tragedy. Modern culture took this sacred technology and turned it into novelty. Museums reduced divine codes to tourist attractions. Scholars stripped the texts of their spirit, interpreting them through clinical detachment. What was once an immersive spiritual system got flattened into mythology, ancient truth, disguised as primitive imagination. Worse still, these teachings were not just ignored, they were buried, rebranded as dangerous, heretical, pagan. When monotheistic systems spread across the ancient world, anything that empowered individual spiritual sovereignty was seen as a threat. The idea that you could meet the divine directly, without priest, without hierarchy, without fear, was too radical to be allowed. And so, the Book of the Dead, with its soul mapping, its multi-dimensional cosmology, its self-guided liberation, was labeled fantasy. Its truths were hidden behind Latin translations, theological condemnation, and academic misinterpretation, not because they were wrong, but because they were powerful. Because if you remember that you don't need permission to be divine, you become ungovernable. If you remember that you are the architect of your soul's path, no system can hold you hostage. This isn't history. This is spiritual revolution disguised as myth. Even science, which claims to seek truth, spent centuries laughing at anything it couldn't measure. The soul, a delusion. Consciousness beyond the brain, impossible. Symbols that change energy, pseudoscience. But now, the tide is turning. Quantum physics is beginning to whisper what the Egyptians sang boldly. That matter isn't fixed, that time isn't linear, that consciousness isn't a byproduct of biology. It's the field in which everything occurs. That observation shapes outcome, that reality responds to intention. In essence, the universe is made of vibration, and the soul is vibration embodied. And what are the Book of the Dead's spells, if not vibrational instruments? Modern researchers exploring near-death experiences find the same stories repeating. People report moving through tunnels, meeting beings of light, feeling watched, not judged, but completely seen. They speak of reviews of their lives, not in detail, but in energy. They describe feeling every choice, every thought, from both their own perspective and those they affected. And above all, they describe a sense of return, not of going somewhere new, but of coming home. Psychedelic explorers, those using sacred medicines, such as DMT or psilocybin, report realms that mirror the duat, hyperdimensional space, entities that communicate in thought, environments that change based on the traveler's mindset, realms where the ego cannot follow, where fear binds you and surrender liberates you. These are not hallucinations, they are doorways. Doorways the Egyptians opened thousands of years ago, not through drugs, but through ritual, breath, sound, intention. They knew the veil was thin, and that, with preparation, the soul could pass through it while still alive. That's the forgotten truth. Death is not the only path to the afterlife. Initiation is. When you dream deeply, when you meditate beyond thought, when you hit a moment of raw clarity in heartbreak or awe, that's the duat. That's the veil thinning. And the Book of the Dead wasn't just for guiding souls after death. It was for those ready to die to illusion while alive. The gates it described aren't future events, they're present thresholds. Every time you're faced with a fear and choose truth, a gate opens. Every time you forgive instead of holding on, a gate opens. Every time you release who you thought you had to be, the duat shifts, and you rise. The weighing of the heart doesn't happen once. It's happening every day, not with a literal feather, but with energy, with resonance. And when the time comes to leave this body, what matters is how light you've become, not by perfection, but by release. You don't need to be a monk or a mystic. You don't need a temple or a tomb. The journey is already unfolding inside you. You are already walking the path of the Akak. The awakened soul, every step toward authenticity, every moment of stillness, every breath where you choose presence instead of fear, is part of your ascension. The Egyptians understood that freedom isn't found after death. It's cultivated through how you live. When you live with courage, when you speak what's true, when you hold integrity even when no one's watching, you're preparing, you're remembering, you're initiating yourself into sovereignty. You don't need golden tombs or 1,000-year-old spells. You need willingness, clarity, sincerity. That's enough. Because this isn't about replicating rituals. It's about reclaiming the essence they pointed to. A soul unafraid of the dark, because it has already faced its own shadows. This is the rebirth the Egyptians taught. Not reincarnation for its own sake, but transfiguration. the merging of soul and self into one luminous being, the I. And you don't have to wait until the end to meet that version of you. You can begin now by letting go of what no longer serves, by honoring the parts of yourself you've ignored, by daring to ask what your soul has known all along, that life is sacred, that death is not the enemy, that you are more than you've been taught to believe. In the end, the Book of the Dead was never about death. It was about truth. It was a mirror showing us that we are not these names, or bodies, or timelines. We are energy, memory, light. And now that you know this, the question becomes not, what happens when I die, but how am I choosing to live now? Are you living in fear of what might come, or in alignment with what you already are? Because when your heart is light, you don't fear death. You walk through the gate, not as a beggar, but as a sovereign. Not in confusion, but in clarity. The ancient ones didn't write to impress scholars. They carved truths into stone for the ones who would come later. For you, for anyone ready to wake up, for the soul who knows that forgetting isn't the end, and remembering is the beginning. And if this message stirred something in you, it's not because you learned something new. It's because you remembered something old. The journey isn't ending, it's just beginning.